You stare at the stack of envelopes on the kitchen table.
Right.
The math doesn't work. It just hasn't worked for months.
Yeah.
You feel a tightness in your chest, this sudden desperate urge to just walk out the front door, leave your phone on the counter, and never come back.
To just completely erase yourself.
Exactly. To just leave the life you've built sitting there like an empty shell.
It's the fantasy of the clean slate.
Yeah. When the walls of, crushing debt or just inescapable obligations or even a deeply toxic relationship begin to close in, the human mind naturally searches for an escape hatch.
Which makes sense. I mean, it feels familiar because we all carry the psychological weight of our accumulated mistakes.
Right, and sometimes that burden just feels entirely too heavy to carry into tomorrow.
So the daydream of waking up somewhere completely new, completely unburdened by your history, that's a universal coping mechanism.
It really is. But the thing is, and this is what we're getting into today, the threshold between having that fleeting, desperate thought while you're staring at unpaid bills and actually taking the methodical steps to execute the ultimate disappearing act, that is a massive psychological chasm.
Oh, totally. Crossing that line takes a person from a very common daydream into the extreme reality of pseudocide.
Right, faking your own death.
Yeah. Because, to daydream about a desert island is harmless.
Sure.
But to meticulously stage a drowning, to leave your personal belongings by the edge of a turbulent ocean, and then watch from afar as your family just collapses in grief, that is an entirely different universe of human behavior.
It really is. And looking at the source material for this deep dive, reading through the psychological profiles of those who attempt this, the investigative manuals on how the fraud is actually detected, and the frankly bizarre historical records of the people who actually tried to pull it off.
It's wild.
It reveals this terrifying intersection of total desperation and really cold calculation.
Yeah, the driving question here is really, what pushes a mind to the point where faking death seems like the only logical move for survival?
So let's get into that psychology. Where does it start?
Well, the causality almost always begins with this feeling of inescapable entrapment.
Like you're backed into a corner.
Exactly. The data we have on pseudocide shows, overwhelmingly, that these acts are motivated by severe financial distress, or the feeling of being completely trapped in a marriage, or facing a massive legal situation.
They feel pushed against a wall they just can't climb.
Right. And there's this researcher, Elizabeth Greenwood, who has extensively studied this phenomenon.
Uh-huh.
And she notes that these people do not view their actions as malicious.
Wait, really? How could they not?
They genuinely believe they are saving their own lives. They operate under this profound psychological illusion that they can, surgically excise the bad parts of their biography.
Wow.
The bankruptcy, the impending criminal charges, the failing marriage. And simply carry on living as a pure, unburdened version of themselves.
Which, that feels fundamentally narcissistic, doesn't it?
Because.
The assumption that you can just amputate your past without amputating your core identity.
Right.
But more than that, it relies on the incredibly cruel assumption that people will actually mourn you.
Yes.
You are taking your massive, overwhelming problems, and instead of solving them, you are transferring that psychological trauma directly onto your loved ones.
Exactly.
It's like trying to rage quit a multiplayer video game, but realizing you're still holding the controller.
That's a great way to put it.
You haven't actually left the game right. You've just smashed the screen for everyone else who is still trying to play.
Yeah, and that transfer of trauma is really the defining characteristic of the act. Because under extreme stress, the human brain can develop this severe tunnel vision.
Right.
The empathy a person should naturally feel for a spouse or a child is completely overridden by a primal, panicked focus on immediate survival.
So they just literally can't see past their own panic.
They can't. But the cruelty of that transfer brings us to a much darker psychological motivation. Because it isn't always about escaping a crushing debt. Sometimes the core motivation is actually control and punishment.
Okay, now that is dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Mark Feldman, who is a clinical professor of psychiatry, he's dedicated his career to researching factitious disorders.
Like Munchausen syndrome.
Exactly. The most culturally recognized form of this used to be called Munchausen. And he points out that faking a death, specifically faking a suicide, which researchers actually categorize as suicide.
Suicide.
Wow.
Yeah. He says that represents the absolute peak of interpersonal manipulation.
Because in that scenario, the person isn't running away to start a new life. They are hovering nearby, watching the blast radius.
Exactly. They are demanding a reaction from the world. Factitious disorders are generally characterized by feigning an illness or an injury to gain attention, sympathy, or to control the behavior of those around them.
To falsely claim you have taken your own life requires a person to be operating at the absolute height of manipulation. It is an incredibly angry, punitive act.
So they're doing it to hurt someone on purpose.
Yes. A person fakes their suicide to punish a partner they feel wronged them, or maybe to test the loyalty of a friend group, or to inflict maximum emotional pain while simultaneously demanding that their memory be idolized.
And if you bring that into the modern era, I mean, the internet has completely revolutionized how this manipulation plays out.
Oh, completely.
Looking at the sources, we are seeing a massive surge in what Dr. Feldman categorizes as Munchausen by internet.
Yeah.
You no longer need to abandon a vehicle on a suspension bridge, right? Or paddle a kayak into a storm. You can execute this entirely from a keyboard.
It's terrifyingly easy.
People are faking their deaths in online support groups, niche message boards, and social media communities.
The barrier to entry for digital manipulation is just so low now. An individual can create a complex persona, spend months integrating themselves deeply into an online support group, maybe for a specific chronic illness or a shared hobby.
Right.
And then, if they feel the group isn't providing them with a sufficient level of constant attention or sympathy, they just have a fabricated relative log onto their account to announce their tragic sudden passing.
It is literally a way to weaponize grief.
Exactly. They use their own imagined death as a bludgeon against a community they felt just didn't appreciate them enough in life.
I remember reading in the materials about a documented case on a large forum where a prolific user faked his death literally just to see the scale of the mourning.
No, the sociological test one.
Right. When he popped back up a few days later with a post essentially saying, just kidding. He attempted to defend himself by claiming he was conducting a sociological test of the community's bonds.
The sheer magnitude of the narcissism there is staggering.
It really is. And it taps into a deeply existential angle, too.
Oh, absolutely. The researcher Sheldon Solomon has written extensively about mortality anxiety and the human drive for self-esteem.
Oh, okay.
And faking a death, especially to watch the reaction, taps into a deeply buried fantasy that almost every human being has entertained during a moment of melancholy.
The whole who is actually going to show up to my funeral thought.
Exactly. What will the eulogies say? It is the ultimate Tom Sawyer fantasy.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, because humans are uniquely burdened with the conscious awareness of our own inevitable demise.
Right.
And Solomon's research suggests that because of this terrifying awareness, we go to extraordinary lengths to prove our lives have meaning and permanence.
So pseudocide allows a person to step outside of the timeline of their own life and measure their impact on the world without having to pay the biological price of actually dying.
Yes, it is an ego trip of the highest order, disguised as a desperate escape.
Man, that presents a truly volatile psychological cocktail.
Very much so.
You have this potent mix of panic, desperation, deep-seated narcissism, and a desperate need for control.
Yeah.
That is the internal mechanism that pushes someone to the edge of the cliff. But having the intense psychological urge to disappear and possessing the cold, calculated ability to actually pull it off in the physical world, those are two vastly different things.
Night and day.
Reading through the investigative manuals and the forensic guides on how fraud is detected in the sources, the logistical nightmare of faking a death in the modern era is almost incomprehensibly complex.
It really is. The standard physical playbook for staging a death relies entirely on the concept of the unrecoverable body.
Because if you fake a murder, you are instantly triggering the most aggressive response the state has.
Right.
A massive homicide investigation. Detectives will tear apart your entire life, your finances, your relationships, looking for a killer.
Exactly. A staged murder invites the very scrutiny the person is desperately trying to escape. So the classic, historically utilized methods are drowning in a volatile body of water, getting lost deep in an unforgiving wilderness, or suffering a catastrophic hiking accident near a cliff edge.
Places where you wouldn't expect to find a body anyway.
Right. The forensic goal is to construct a physical scenario where the absence of a body is the expected outcome, rather than a suspicious anomaly.
But executing that scenario requires months of emotionless, meticulous calculation.
Which presents an enormous problem.
Because the people attempting this are usually in a state of blind, suffocating panic.
Yes. That is the core paradox of the fake death. The people who are most motivated to do it, the ones staring at bankruptcy or prison or a completely shattered reputation, are the ones whose brains are flooding with cortisol.
Right, they can't think straight.
They're the least equipped to sit down and build a flawless logical timeline. If a successful disappearance requires a year of careful, untraceable planning, the person acting out of sheer desperation thinks they can pull it off on a random Tuesday afternoon.
Because panic entirely destroys executive function.
Yeah.
Exactly. To successfully vanish, a person must engage in a disciplined process of gradual erasure.
Okay, let's break that down. Gradual erasure. Let's consider the digital footprint.
Oh, this is the biggest hurdle today.
Right, because a digital footprint isn't just a social media profile. It is the shadow your physical devices cast across the world.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this right now on a smartphone, your device is constantly searching for the strongest signal. It's pinging multiple cell towers simultaneously to triangulate your location.
Constantly.
That metadata is permanently logged by telecommunications companies.
So if someone decides to fake their death and leaves their phone on the driver's seat of an abandoned car, investigators don't just see where the phone stopped.
They pull the historical data.
Exactly. They look back. Did the phone GPS route a path to a remote beach a week prior for a dry run?
Oh, wow.
Did the browser history show searches for local water temperatures or tidal charts?
It's all right there.
Yeah. Gradual erasure means abandoning these devices slowly, changing behavioral patterns over months, so that the sudden stop doesn't look like a calculated cliff edge.
And the financial logistics are even harder.
Oh, yeah.
You need money to live, but suddenly withdrawing your entire life savings from a deck account the day before you mysteriously vanish in a hiking accident.
Blazing red flag.
Right. Fraud investigators see that immediately.
You have to stockpile cash incrementally, withdrawing small, unremarkable amounts over a very long period.
And you have to curate the physical evidence left behind, too.
Right. Forensic investigators actually call this the Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone.
Yeah. It is notoriously difficult for a panicked mind to fake.
Because if you leave too much evidence behind, like, say, your wallet perfectly centered on a beach towel, your ID facing up, your keys neatly stacked,
It looks like a movie set.
it looks staged.
But if you leave too little behind, if you take your winter coat and your passport before you supposedly drown in the ocean during the summer, it looks deeply suspicious.
So the fugitive has to leave exactly the right amount of their life behind to make the accident look genuinely chaotic and uncalculated.
And that takes a clear head, which they do not have.
And even if they pull that off, let's look at the legal brick wall on the other side of that accident.
Right.
Faking a death, the physical act of leaving your clothes on a beach and hiding in the woods, isn't technically a crime in many jurisdictions.
There is no law against wanting to be left alone.
Exactly. But surviving the next day, buying a sandwich the next week.
That requires a cascading avalanche of severe felonies.
Yeah, to survive in the modern world, you require two things: currency and a verifiable identity.
So if a spouse attempts to claim a life insurance policy based on the staged accident, the fugitive is now complicit in massive insurance fraud.
Right. And if the fugitive stops paying taxes because they are legally considered dead, they're committing federal tax evasion.
And if they attempt to create a fake ID or steal a social security number to rent an apartment, they are committing identity fraud and forgery.
Doing this in the 2020s is fundamentally different than doing it in the 1970s.
Oh, it's night and day.
We live in an era of ubiquitous facial recognition cameras at every intersection and storefront. Digital footprints are permanently etched into global servers.
Yeah, if you lack a verifiable identity, you cannot sign a lease, you cannot open a bank account, and you cannot get a legitimate job.
So the romanticized, cinematic idea of sipping a cocktail on a sun-drenched beach under an assumed name, it's completely shattered by the reality of the situation.
The reality is washing dishes for cash under the table in a windowless kitchen.
Yeah.
Living in constant paranoid fear because a routine traffic stop or a simple background check will immediately send you to federal prison.
And the psychological toll of that paranoia usually breaks the fugitive before the law enforcement dragnet even does.
Exactly. They trip over their own psychology.
Which brings us back to the narcissism.
The most common mistake, the fatal flaw that brings down elaborate multi-year deceptions, is the return of that narcissism we discussed earlier. They simply cannot resist the urge to check the world's reaction.
Right. They go through months of planning, they pull off the accident, they secure a cash-only room somewhere, they are finally free.
Then what do?
They walk into an internet cafe or use a burner phone to search their own name and read their local newspaper's obituary.
And in doing so, they just illuminate themselves on a map.
Right.
They leave an IP address. They leave a digital breadcrumb. Fraud investigators for life insurance companies are incredibly thorough.
I bet.
When they are already suspicious about a missing body and a sudden, massive financial claim by a surviving spouse, they monitor the digital accounts of the deceased.
Oh, of course they do.
So when an IP address from a neighboring state suddenly pings the supposedly dead person's email account, or searches for news articles about the search and rescue operation, investigators follow that digital thread right to the front door of the fugitive.
The psychological need for validation just completely overpowers the logical requirement for absolute silence.
Every single time.
And when the logic completely fails, the historical records of these attempts become spectacular, embarrassing disasters.
Oh, the hubris is almost comical in some of these cases.
The sources outline several cases that perfectly illustrate this. Samuel Israel III is a perfect example of a panicked mind attempting to use cinematic cliches to escape reality.
Right.
He was this prominent hedge fund manager facing 22 years in federal prison.
22 years.
Yeah. He had orchestrated a massive Ponzi scheme, defrauding investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. So in 2008, on the exact day he was mandated to report to federal prison, he drives his SUV to the Bear Mountain Bridge in New York State.
Okay.
He parks it, leaves the keys inside, and writes a message in the dust on the hood of the car.
Well, this is the worst part. He wrote "Suicide is Painless,"
Yeah.
which is the title of the theme song to the television show MHH, traced out in the dust of his own vehicle.
It is the absolute peak of amateur hour. Totally.
Authorities took one look at it and immediately suspected a hoax. It lacked any of the chaos of a genuine tragedy.
Plus, didn't people see him?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinary people driving over the bridge reported seeing another vehicle pull up behind the SUV and just pick someone up.
So much for gradual erasure.
Exactly. He didn't even attempt the gradual erasure we talked about. He just dropped a prop on a bridge and drove away.
Wow.
He ended up surrendering at an RV campground in Massachusetts a few weeks later. The judge actually added extra time to his sentence for obstruction of justice.
What's amazing?
But as absurd as Samuel Israel III was, his attempt pales in comparison to the absolute masterclass in catastrophic hubris.
The Canoe Man.
The Canoe Man, John Darwin.
Yeah, the case of John Darwin from 2002 remains one of the most infamous instances of pseudocide in modern history.
It really does.
It is basically a forensic textbook on everything we have covered so far. The crushing financial pressure, the fundamentally flawed planning, the cascade of secondary fraud, and the staggering audacity of the execution and the aftermath. Okay, so let's dig into him. Who exactly was John Darwin, and what pushed him to paddle out into the ocean?
Well, John Darwin was a former school teacher and prison officer. He was living in Seaton Carew, which is a town on the North Sea coast of England.
Okay.
He lived there with his wife, Anne. And over the years, they had amassed a crippling amount of debt.
Right.
They had aggressively purchased a property portfolio, specifically a large block of bedsits.
And for those unfamiliar with the term, what is a bedsit?
A bedsit is basically a multi-occupancy rooming house that's really common in the UK. Tenants rent individual bedrooms, but they share communal bathrooms and kitchens.
Okay, got it.
So the Darwins had leveraged themselves to the breaking point to buy these properties. And by early 2002, the financial pressure was entirely unmanageable,
So they were drowning in debt.
literally facing ruin.
Oh.
So John Darwin takes his homemade red kayak and he paddles out into the notoriously turbulent waters of the North Sea.
Right.
And he simply disappears.
Which kicks off a massive maritime search and rescue operation.
Huge. They cover over 60 square miles of coastline using helicopters and boats.
But maritime rescue experts were immediately puzzled, right? Because the sea was unusually calm that specific day.
Yes. It wasn't the kind of weather that typically claims an experienced kayaker.
A huge red flag.
Exactly. But eventually, the search teams did find his shattered kayak washed up on a beach, and later, his paddle.
And the physical evidence, the broken boat and the missing man, was enough.
It was enough for the authorities, and crucially, it was enough for his 2 adult sons.
Wow.
They genuinely believed their father had been consumed by the sea. So the search was called off, the legal machinery slowly turned, a death certificate was eventually issued.
And Anne Darwin successfully collected the life insurance payout.
Right, totaling around £250,000.
So £250,000.
Yes. That money was immediately used to clear their massive mortgage and satisfy their creditors. So on paper, the illusion worked.
The debt was gone.
The debt was gone.
And if he had just used that time to flee to the other side of the planet, it might have stayed a cold case.
It might have.
But John Darwin didn't go to an island. The man faked his death in the ocean, and then went to live in one of the bedsits they owned.
Yes.
A bedsit that was physically connected right next door to his own family home.
Unbelievable.
He was hiding from the world by peering through the curtains at his own grieving family.
The level of psychological compartmentalization required to do that is terrifying.
He lived as a ghost in his own life.
He really did. He would secretly enter his wife's home. He eventually constructed a hidden door behind a wardrobe that connected his secret bedsit directly into Anne's bedroom.
So he was literally living inches away from the life he had supposedly departed.
Yeah. But to eventually leave that room and enjoy this stolen insurance money, he needed a new identity. He couldn't travel internationally as John Darwin.
Right.
So he utilized a classic macabre loophole that was prevalent before the era of interconnected digital databases.
And this part is just so grim. He went to a local library, scoured the microfiche records of local births and deaths, and found a baby named John Jones, who had been born around the same time as him,
Right?
but who had tragically died in infancy in 1950.
Yes. And by obtaining the birth certificate of that deceased infant, Darwin was able to apply for a legitimate British passport.
Because in 2002, the passport office databases did not automatically cross-reference with death registries in real time.
Exactly. The birth certificate looked valid, the application was approved, and the man who supposedly drowned in the North Sea was suddenly holding a pristine legal passport under the name John Jones.
So armed with this stolen identity, John and Anne Darwin set their sights on a permanent escape.
Finally.
They decide to move to Panama. In 2006, they fly to Central America to purchase a large tropical estate.
And their grand business plan was to run ecotourism canoeing holidays.
The irony is staggering.
It really is.
The man who committed massive fraud by faking a canoe accident wants his retirement to consist of renting canoes to tourists.
You can't make it up. And the entire scheme unraveled because of a mundane, modern piece of technology, a digital camera.
Yep.
While they were finalizing the property purchase in Panama, they utilized the services of a local real estate agency. The agent, thrilled to have British expats buying property, asked to take a quick photograph of the happy couple in the office.
And they actually posed for it.
John and Anne smiled for the camera. And that agent then uploaded the perfectly clear digital photograph to the company's website to promote their real estate services.
So the photograph just sat there on a public server, waiting.
Just waiting.
Meanwhile, the geopolitical landscape shifts. Panama alters its visa laws. They institute a much more rigorous background check process for foreign investors, requiring verification from UK police to secure the necessary visas.
Right. So John Darwin realizes his passport, built on the stolen identity of an infant from 1950, is going to be heavily scrutinized.
It will inevitably collapse under a modern police background check.
Exactly. The walls are closing in again. He needs a way to legitimize his presence in the world without going to Panamanian prison.
So his solution is perhaps the most audacious lie in the history of the phenomenon.
It really is.
In December 2007, he flies back to the UK, walks through the front doors of a police station in London, gives his real name, and claims he has amnesia.
He told the officers he believed he was a missing person, but that his memory was a complete blank. He claimed he had no recollection of the kayak, the ocean, or the preceding 5 years.
He was gambling on the passage of time.
Yeah. He assumed that because there was no physical evidence of fraud from the day of the disappearance, the police would have no choice but to accept his medical anomaly.
He literally expected to walk out of the station, resume his life as a legally resurrected man, entirely debt-free, with the insurance money safely laundered in Panamanian real estate.
Which is insane.
I mean, how does a human brain convince itself that walking into a police station with an amnesia defense is a viable strategy when there is a high-resolution photograph of him smiling in Panama sitting on the public internet?
It illustrates the profound distortion of reality that occurs in a criminal mind committed to a multi-year deception.
Yeah.
When a person is 5 years deep into a lie that involves massive financial fraud and the complete devastation of their family, admitting the truth is a psychological impossibility.
Right.
The brain attempts to bend the laws of reality to fit the narrative required for survival. He genuinely believed he could outsmart the institutional memory of the state.
But the state didn't need institutional memory. The state had Google.
Yep.
An ordinary person, some reports say a member of the public, others say a journalist, simply typed the words John, Anne, and Panama into Google Images.
And there it was.
The first result.
The supposedly drowned canoe man, looking healthy and relaxed, smiling next to his grieving widow in a brightly lit real estate office.
Unbelievable.
The police, who had actually already been quietly investigating Anne Darwin due to some highly suspicious offshore financial transfers she had been making, immediately arrested them both.
And the consequences were absolute. Both John and Anne were sentenced to over 6 years in prison for fraud and money laundering.
But the most devastating cost was not the loss of liberty.
Yeah.
It was the complete destruction of their family.
Their 2 adult sons.
Yeah. They had genuinely mourned the death of their father. They had stood at a memorial service. And upon the arrest, they discovered that their mother had looked them in the eyes and lied to them every single day for 5 years.
Comforting them over a death she knew was faked.
While their father was literally living on the other side of her bedroom wall.
That is just chilling. The sons issued a public statement entirely disowning their parents. The trauma was absolute.
Yeah.
And while the Darwin case is this incredible story of financial desperation and catastrophic greed, the sources reveal another category of pseudocide entirely. Some people weaponize the faked death for reasons that have nothing to do with mortgages or life insurance.
Right. They use the concept to manipulate geopolitics, to force a societal reaction, or just to escape the pressure of their own public image.
Like the case of Arkady Babchenko.
Yes. This moves the conversation from suburban financial fraud to the intense realm of international espionage and state-sponsored narrative control.
So in 2018, Babchenko was a prominent, highly vocal Russian journalist who had been fiercely critical of the Kremlin.
Right.
Fearing for his safety, he had fled into exile and was living in Kiev, Ukraine. In May of that year, breaking news reports stated he had been assassinated in his apartment building.
And the details released to the press were incredibly graphic and specific. Ukrainian authorities stated he had been shot 3 times in the back while returning to his apartment with groceries.
Wow.
His wife supposedly found him bleeding out on the floor, and he was pronounced dead in the ambulance.
And the global reaction was immediate and furious. Major news organizations wrote extensive obituaries. The British Foreign Secretary publicly condemned the assassination. It became a massive international incident.
But then, 24 hours later, the Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, held a highly publicized press conference to discuss the assassination.
Okay.
And Arkady Babchenko physically walked out onto the stage entirely unharmed.
The footage of the journalists in that room is incredible. The shock is palpable. They are staring at a ghost.
The SBU and Babchenko explained that the entire assassination had been a meticulously staged sting operation.
A sting operation.
Yeah. Ukrainian officials stated they had intercepted intelligence detailing a genuine plot originating in Russia to have Babchenko murdered.
So there is a real threat.
According to them, yes. And to capture the middlemen coordinating the hit, and to secure hard evidence of the conspiracy, the SBU determined that they had to make the organizers believe the assassination had been successfully carried out.
That is intense.
They used a makeup artist to stage the crime scene with fake blood, placed Babchenko in an ambulance, officially checked him into a morgue, and let the entire world believe he was dead for a full day.
And the fallout from the act itself was just a firestorm.
Massive.
Looking impartially at what happened next, on one hand, Ukrainian officials pointed to the sting as a massive success.
Right.
They claimed it thwarted dozens of potential contract killings across the country and led directly to the arrest of a suspect who had allegedly been paid $40,000 to organize the hit.
But on the other side, Russian officials responded by aggressively mocking the entire operation, dismissing it as a theatrical provocation.
Right. But the most intense debate actually occurred within the global journalistic community itself.
Oh, the ethical debate was ferocious.
Yeah.
Journalists worldwide were incensed. Prominent media experts argued that by participating in a state-sponsored hoax, Babchenko had fundamentally undermined the credibility of the press.
The argument being that a journalist's entire utility relies on public trust.
Exactly. If the public knows a journalist is willing to stage their own bloody murder in cooperation with the domestic intelligence agency, how can the public ever trust the reporting that comes from that region again?
But Babchenko defended his actions vigorously.
He do.
He argued that journalistic ethics are a luxury when you are facing a literal assassin's bullet.
Right. He stated he had no choice. It was a matter of physical survival and catching the people trying to kill him.
It raises a massive question about narrative control. If a person fakes their death to catch a killer, they are forcibly rewriting reality.
Yeah.
They are demanding the world react to a fiction. And once that fiction is revealed, the line between undeniable fact and state-sponsored theater becomes dangerously blurred.
And that concept of forcing the world to react to a manufactured reality echoes throughout history. even when the stakes are purely personal.
Like Timothy Dexter.
Yes. Consider Timothy Dexter, an incredibly eccentric 18th century businessman in New England. He amassed a fortune through bizarre, seemingly foolish trades that inexplicably paid off. But wealth wasn't enough for him. He craved absolute adoration. So he staged his own elaborate wake.
Just to see who would show up.
He invited the entire town just to stand in hiding and observe who actually wept for him.
And then what happened?
Well, when he noticed his own wife wasn't crying convincingly enough for his liking, he emerged from hiding and physically caned her.
Wow. It is the ultimate brutal manifestation of the narcissism we explored earlier.
Exactly.
He demanded a specific emotional performance from reality, and when reality failed to provide the exact level of adulation he felt he deserved, he punished it.
It is an aggressive attempt to control how you are perceived.
Yeah.
And a slightly more modern example of escaping perception is John Stonehouse.
The MP?
Right, a member of parliament in the UK who faked his drowning off a beach in Miami in 1974.
He left his clothes folded on the sand and vanished.
He was eventually apprehended in Australia a year later, living under the name of a deceased constituent.
You sound familiar.
Very. But when questioned about why an elected official would orchestrate such a bizarre crime, he claimed that a parallel personality had taken over his mind.
A parallel personality.
He stated he despised the humbug and sham of his public life and political duties.
Which is a desperate legal defense, obviously, but it speaks volumes about the psychological pressure of the faked death.
Yeah.
The original identity, the politician, the debtor, the failing husband, is crushed under the weight of expectation. The mind fractures, and the parallel personality physicalizes the escape.
We have spent a long time exploring the desperate, the chaotic, the highly illegal, and the bizarrely eccentric methods people employ to vanish.
Right.
But the deepest revelation in the source material is that faking your death is entirely unnecessary.
This is the real turn.
There is a meticulously structured, legally unassailable way to disappear.
This is the pivot from the chaos of pseudocide to the rigid structure of legal identity transformation. Reviewing insights from firms like Amicus International Consulting, an organization that specializes in privacy and legal disappearance, the primary directive is clear. True, sustainable anonymity is not achieved by committing fraud or abandoning a car on a bridge.
No.
It is achieved through strict, exhaustive alignment with global jurisdictional laws.
And the motivations for utilizing a firm like Amicus are rarely about dodging a mortgage or escaping an underwater hedge fund.
What are they used for, then?
These legal mechanisms are typically employed by individuals facing genuine existential threats. They work with survivors of severe, systemic domestic violence whose abusers have deep resources.
Okay.
They assist individuals fleeing aggressive, technologically sophisticated stalkers. They help whistleblowers who are facing violent retaliation from cartels or corrupt organizations.
So they are utilizing civil law to construct an impenetrable protective shield around a vulnerable person.
Exactly.
Because faking a death is like smashing a window, jumping into the chaotic darkness of the woods, and hoping the dogs lose your scent. Legally disappearing is like hiring a team of architects to petition the government to build you a brand new reinforced steel door on a house in a different country and having the state hand you the only key.
That's the perfect analogy. It is entirely pristine.
So how does the mechanism actually work? Because the sources map out a really rigorous bureaucratic gauntlet.
Well, step one is the legal name change. And this is fundamentally different from John Darwin's stealing a dead infant's birth certificate.
Yeah, no fraud.
This involves formally petitioning a civil court. The individual must present a compelling evidence-based justification to a judge, such as documented threats to their life or safety.
Okay.
If the judge agrees, they issue a sealed court order changing the name.
And the mechanism of a sealed order is vital here.
Very.
In a normal name change, the record is public. Anyone can search the court docket and see that John Smith became Alex Johnson. But a sealed order means the judge has determined that public disclosure presents a threat to life. The record is locked. The stalker or the abuser cannot legally access the civil registry to find the new identity.
And in jurisdictions like the UK, New Zealand, or Canada, the privacy laws are robust enough to protect this process. In jurisdictions with more archaic public record laws, it can be a massive legal battle.
So once the legal bedrock of the sealed name change is established, what's next?
Steps 2 and 3 involve the grueling work of synchronizing civil records and executing a true digital erasure.
The synchronization must be flawless.
Exactly. You must update tax codes, social security numbers, and passports. If a fugitive attempts to cross an international border with a newly minted passport, but their secondary identification or health database doesn't match the new biometric data, the Border Control Database flags the mismatch immediately.
And the digital erasure is where the sheer scale of the modern surveillance state becomes apparent. You can't just change your Instagram handle and delete your old tweets.
Not even close. You have to abandon a lifetime of metadata.
A true digital scrub requires severing all ties to legacy hardware.
Right. The individual must abandon their old smartphones and laptops.
Because of the MASH addresses, right?
Yes, the MSG addresses, the unique hardware identifiers, are tied to their old identity.
Wow.
They must adopt zero-knowledge encrypted cloud storage. They must utilize commercial-grade VPNs to mask their new IP addresses, ensuring that their new digital persona never accidentally pings a server from an IP block associated with their past.
Because if the new identity logs into an old email account for even a millisecond, the firewall between the two lives collapses.
Instantly.
Okay, so once the identity is legally secured and the digital ghost is exercised, steps 4 and 5 involve the physical relocation and the restructuring of assets.
Right. You cannot simply fly to a tropical country on a tourist visa and overstay. You utilize the new legal identity to apply for legitimate long-term residency.
The sources detail programs like the D7 visa in Portugal.
The D7 in Portugal is a passive income visa. If the individual can prove a steady stream of legal remote income, the Portuguese government grants them legal residency. There is no fraud involved.
And other avenues involve citizenship by investment programs, such as those offered by Vanuatu.
Yeah, in Vanuatu, an individual can essentially purchase a passport.
Just buy one.
Basically, they make a significant, non-refundable economic contribution to the country's development fund, often well over $100,000.
Wow.
And in return, they undergo a background check and are granted full citizenship. It is an entirely legal, state-sanctioned transaction.
And managing the finances of that new life requires navigating complex international tax laws. The individual must open offshore bank accounts in jurisdictions that do not adhere to the CRS.
A common reporting standard.
Right. The CRS is a global information standard where participating countries automatically exchange financial and tax information about non-residents with their home countries.
So if a person is trying to disappear legally, they cannot have their new bank in Switzerland automatically sending reports to their old tax authority.
Exactly. They must structure their assets in non-CRS jurisdictions using their new legal tax ID, ensuring their wealth is secure and invisible to their physical life.
When you look at the case studies of people who actually navigate this labyrinth, the contrast with the canoe man is absolute.
Night and day.
A nurse in Canada, relentlessly hunted by a violent stalker who had compromised her digital life, secures a sealed name change, utilizes a D7 visa, and relocates to Lisbon.
And she lives entirely anonymously, renting a beautiful apartment, walking the streets without fear because her paperwork is flawless.
Exactly. Or a whistleblower in the United States, facing severe retaliation, secures economic citizenship in Belize and starts a new business under a new legal entity. They are free because they follow the letter of the law.
But exploring those case studies really highlights a profound truth about legal disappearance. The sheer complexity of navigating international tax law, securing sealed court orders, and purchasing economic citizenship requires an immense amount of capital and specialized knowledge.
It requires deep systemic privilege. The pristine legal escape hatch is a luxury commodity.
Right. The person we discussed at the very beginning of this journey, the person staring at the unpaid utility bills, feeling the crushing weight of ordinary debt, cannot afford to hire an international privacy consulting firm.
No.
They do not have $100,000 to wire to Vanuatu for a new passport.
The legal framework proves something vital about human society. Society absolutely allows for second chances. It provides the mechanisms for complete, permanent reinvention.
But society demands a punishing bureaucratic and financial toll for that privilege.
Exactly. The dramatic flair of faking an accident in the ocean is the desperate man's attempt to steal what the wealthy man simply purchases.
Wow. Complete anonymity is no longer a default human state. It is a fortress that must be bought, legally permitted, and relentlessly maintained.
Well said.
We have journeyed deep into the mechanics of erasure. We started with the universal desperate fantasy of the clean slate, staring at those envelopes on the table. We waded through the incredibly complex, highly illegal, and physically punishing logistics of the fake death.
We examine the catastrophic hubris of men writing television theme songs in the dust.
And the devastating cruelty of a man hiding behind a wardrobe while his sons mourned him.
We navigated the intense geopolitical theater of a staged assassination.
And finally, we mapped the very real, very expensive bureaucratic path to legally erasing your identity.
The overarching lesson here is that the desire to start over is a core human impulse, but the execution requires a terrible choice.
Yeah.
You must possess either the willingness to completely break the law and shatter the emotional lives of your loved ones, or the vast resources required to navigate a labyrinth of international jurisprudence.
The clean slate is a myth.
It is never truly clean. An erasure always leaves a mark on someone, somewhere.
So think about the life you have constructed right now. Consider the vast, invisible web of your digital footprint pinging across towers. Think about your debts, your deep relationships, your history, your very name.
Everything that anchors you.
Imagine someone handed you a manila envelope tomorrow. Inside is a new, legally pristine identity, a valid passport to a safe and beautiful country, and a bank account holding enough money to sustain you.
But taking that envelope means you can never, ever look back.
You can never speak to your family again. You can never check your old messages. You vanish entirely.
Would you open the envelope?
Or is the heavy, complicated, deeply messy baggage of your current identity exactly the anchor you need to stay tethered to this world? Something to think about. Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive.